Well, hello there, everybody. It is Saturday, the 21st of February, 2026. Thank you for being here. Special edition of Courtroom Insider. Normally, we're not coming on a Saturday, but I wanted to bring you some interviews tonight over the weekend and then let you know what we're doing to prepare for the Kouri Richins trial, which starts on Monday. So we will talk about that here in a minute. Would love to know where you're watching from. If you have any questions, I hope you're having a good weekend, enjoying it. It's very cold here in eastern Idaho. It's like winter finally decided to arrive, and we're a couple months late, but I'm glad it's here, and hopefully you are enjoying the weekend. Here's what we've got coming up tonight. I've interviewed Brad Bradley several times before, or a couple of times, I guess you could say. Brad Bradley's sister vanished from a cruise ship back in the 90s. And her story was the topic of a smash Netflix series that came out just a few months ago. She is still missing. We had here on Courtroom Insider her boyfriend at the time, a couple of months ago. Her boyfriend at the time, they were dating when she vanished. She was with her family on this Royal Caribbean cruise ship when she disappeared. And there's a lot of questions surrounding her disappearance. I started to think about Brad when Nancy Guthrie disappeared and wondered, they've been in such similar circumstances as far as both having loved ones just vanish with so many questions and so many weird circumstances surrounding their disappearances. And so I reached out to him to ask if he would consider coming on Courtroom Insider. And he has an interesting perspective, I think. Nancy Guthrie's been missing nearly a month now. Well, we're going to go into week 4 starting Sunday. So tomorrow would be going into week 4. So she's been missing for 3 weeks now. No signs. There's been a lot of supposed witnesses or people of interest. Not a lot. A few that the police have gone after. There's been gloves that have been found near her home. The camera surveillance footage that has come out, and of course, this is getting a lot of prominent publicity because a couple of reasons. One, she's 84, who abducts an 84-year-old from their home in the middle of the night. And probably the main reason is because she's the mother of Savannah Guthrie, the host of the Today Show. And a lot of people love Savannah, know Savannah, watch Savannah. And this is such a bizarre thing, circumstance. But, and I'm not discounting it, please don't read it that way, but what if you took away those things? What if you took away the fact that her daughter wasn't a national news anchor? Would it be getting as much publicity? Would the authorities be as focused on it as other missing people? Brad Bradley's going to tell you no. And I think a lot of you would agree with it. I just posted this morning on my Facebook page about this teenager, Sebastian, who disappeared 2 years ago, Monday. I had no idea who he was. I didn't know. There is an FBI reward for $50,000, but where is he? So anyway, we're going to talk about that again, not discounting the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie. I don't want you to read into that, but there are thousands of missing people out there that don't get the kind of publicity that this case gets. Then after I talk to Brad tonight, you're going to hear from Gilbert King. He's the host of Bone Valley, a podcast I became obsessed with a few months ago. So I'll introduce him in just a moment. But for now, why don't we hop in and talk with Brad Bradley? Brad, good to see you again. I want to start off by asking your thoughts, first of all, about the Nancy Guthrie disappearance, because when she disappeared as a journalist, I think in my mind, the other missing people that I've covered over the years, and your name came to the top of the list. Is it kind of weird for you when other cases become so prominent and you're looking, being like, I know what that family's going through?
Yeah, and it's obviously a different situation. I don't recall if ever I've heard of an 84-year-old person being abducted or whatever has happened to Miss Guthrie. It is, obviously very reminiscent of our experience early on and the attention that it garnered, in the initial weeks following Amy's disappearance. I'm hopeful, and I truly hope that Nancy Guthrie is found alive, and and our system can track down those people responsible for her. But like you said, there's a lot of people missing. And at any given moment, there's 90,000 or 100,000 people missing. A person goes missing on average one every minute. And while, and I don't mean to inflate the numbers, I think since, in 2024, the FBI's NCIC database, it's a National Crime Information Center missing persons file, on average, there's somewhere around 550,000 people reported missing every year in the United States. And, while 85 to 90% of those cases are solved quickly, either by finding the person or a body or what have you, there's still 10 to 15% that remain unsolved. So, since Nancy Guthrie disappeared 3 weeks ago, by statistical average, there's somewhere around 34,000 people that have been reported missing.
Wow.
And if only 10% of those, or 15%, that's somewhere between 3,000 to 5,000 other victims and other victims' families that are facing the same nightmare that the Guthries are.
Yeah.
So it's been eye-opening to see the amount of attention. And again, obviously, Amy's case has had a lot of attention over the past several months, not only early on, but since the Netflix documentary. But there's a lot of families that don't get any headlines and aren't talked about and nobody knows about. I've spoken to a lot of people recently that have no idea of the numbers that I just, spoke on. So I don't think people realize, what a problem it is and has been for a long, long time.
Yeah, I saw the message you put on X the other night explaining that. And even just this morning, I had someone send me some pictures of a teenage boy who disappeared. And I click on the link and it goes to the FBI's website. And this kid's been missing for 2 years. His name is Sebastian. I'd never heard of the kid. I mean, he disappeared from his bedroom 2 years ago on Monday. Why do you think that particular cases get covered over others? Have you been able to think about this? I mean, obviously Nancy Guthrie, her daughter is a journalist and a lot of people in news know her, so that probably plays into it. But then there's other cases that they have to fight for any sort of media coverage.
Yeah, and obviously justice shouldn't be dependent on headlines. Unfortunately, I've never heard of Sebastian either.
Yeah.
The amount of attention, I don't know whether it's due to fame or wealth or status or connections or what it is, but it's, I don't think that any of that should dictate the amount of resources that are committed to any missing persons case. Every missing person matters. Every missing person's family goes through the same ordeal that, the ones in the headlines get. And I know there's probably other people with missing family members that look at Amy's case and hear me talking and wonder why we get so much attention and they don't. It's not about pitting one victim or one family against another. I mean, there should be a system. Obviously we've seen what's possible with how this case has been resourced and the amount of attention that it's gotten, and that in my opinion should set a precedent for how missing people's cases are handled. And I don't know how to go about doing that or accomplish affecting that change, but I feel like it should be something that people are more aware of, and hopefully we can get some energy behind it and and make some sort of systemic change.
What do you say to people, Brad, who might reach out to you and say, I have a loved one who's been missing. Maybe it's been a few years, few months. I've tried to get law enforcement to do something. I've tried to get the media involved. How do I get it back out there? I mean, do you have any suggestions? And has this happened to you where families of other missing people are like, listen, I need your help. What should I do?
There's been a couple actually since the documentary came out, not so much in the past. I don't get any personal contact from other victims' families. Perhaps my parents have, and I'm not aware of it. But we basically refer them to FBI. Obviously, tell them to speak to as many local or elected officials as they can. Get in touch with different media organizations and try to, get someone to agree to put the story out there. But, it's difficult. A lot of it happens organically. And, a lot of the stuff that I've done is people reaching out to me. It doesn't take, um, a whole lot of forethought on my part to make these things happen. They just kind of come, in a steady stream, especially since last summer. But I don't know. I mean, I guess that's a tough question on the spot. I think um, you just have to keep talking about it, and thankfully for a lot of people these days, the engine that is social media that we didn't have when Amy disappeared, I think is a tremendous tool. I can't tell you how many people I've gotten in touch with that have gotten me in touch with other people. I mean, the connectivity there is amazing. So I would have people go on social media. I think that's probably the biggest influence these days on how to get your case out there and get people talking about it.
Yeah. Do you think Amy, if she had disappeared today or during our time right now with social media, 24/7 news cycles, cell phones with cameras and surveillance cameras, do you think the case would have maybe been solved or treated differently?
I do. I do. I think, there's a lot more tools out there, like you just listed. Unfortunately, the way the case was handled from, the first instant we realized she was missing, or should I say mishandled. We lost the first 48 hours, which I think everybody understands are fairly crucial in any investigation. But I do think, with all the, cell phones and cameras and eyes and ears and people talking, I think we would have had a much greater chance at finding her and or finding out what happened to her.
Yeah. Can you tell us, Brad, is there anything new? Where does the investigation stand right now?
Yeah, there's some things we're working on, and I know it's been, quite a long time that I've been saying that, there's some things happening that I can't share, and those things are still ongoing. So I'd like people to understand that, there's some sensitive things that are happening that I can't talk about, and obviously we're waiting for updates and information from certain people in certain places, but nothing concrete, nothing, in regard to exactly where she is or exactly what happened or who's involved or who's guilty and who's not. I don't have any updates on that information, but there are a lot of channels we're working through politically that we're hoping will, result in something coming from. But I don't have any significant updates to share with you.
Have you thought about, Brad, ever? I'm sure you have. You and your family going back down to the islands and retracing kind of the steps of where she may have been or where the ship stopped, like doing that now, or would that be not so fruitful 20, 30 years later?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we have people in different places. We've sent investigators. There are plans, in the works for certain things, but us going down personally, I don't know. We're so visible and have been. I think we'd be, maybe at least I would be, since I've been all over the place, is, a lot more recognizable. I don't know how safe or unsafe that would be, where to start, what island to go to. There are a lot of different places that we suspect Amy may have been. Curacao, Aruba, Barbados, Venezuela. I just don't. It's kind of like the needle in the haystack thing. Where do you start? And if you have a needle and you have 6 different haystacks, which one do you start looking in? So with life the way it works, and with a full-time job and responsibilities, it's and limited resources and funds, it's hard to just pick up and do that and spend any meaningful time in any place that I think would be result in anything significant.
Yeah, it's interesting how some people will look at maybe your family or other families of missing people and be like, well, why aren't they down there looking, or why aren't they doing this or that? Well, as you mentioned, who's going to pay the bills?
Yeah.
You can't, who has, very few of us can just leave our life and go devote 100%. You've got kids in school, you've got, other things happening. So, uh, I imagine that's a frustration that goes through your mind and other people's minds. What would you say to, having been in this situation 3 weeks out from, Nancy Guthrie, who vanished 3 weeks ago? Do you look back and be like, okay, where were you mentally 3 weeks after Amy disappeared? And what would you say to a family who's maybe this is kind of a new thing and it's wearing off? I mean, do you have like a message of hope or a message of anything to these people?
I mean, there's always hope. I mean, even, coming up on 28 years later, we still have a tremendous amount of hope. And I think that's the only thing that comes from not knowing, and when you don't have, any closure, it's easy to sit back and say, wow, that must be the hardest thing. And obviously it is hard and it's frustrating. But the not knowing allows for hope, and, I think it's important to always remember, that without any closure, you have to, as a family, you have to operate like, your loved one is out there waiting for you and hoping that you're doing everything you can do to help find them. So, never give up. You can always hope, until, some news comes forward or some piece of information or evidence reveals that isn't the case anymore. So, I don't think that, with the Nancy Guthrie case, obviously with the headlines and the urgency that we've all seen from not only the news media, but all the different agencies that are involved in trying to find her. And then people look at Amy's case and they say, well, obviously this just happened and Amy's was almost 28 years ago. If urgency is defined only by recency, that implies that justice for missing people and missing people's families has a shelf life. And I don't believe that's true. I don't believe anyone thinks that that's a true statement. And obviously that's not how it should be. So you have to keep hoping and keep pushing and keep trying. And that's all anybody can do. And hopefully for those lucky few, that get the resources and the help that they need and the attention, from the right people, hopefully, like I said earlier, 85% of these cases are solved. So it depends on how you look at things. I think the chances are obviously greater that missing people are found than not. But like I said before, there's, any given moment, there's 100,000 people in the United States that are not found or accounted for. So, I would just say, I feel like there needs to be some sort of systemic change, because again, with the precedent that we've seen recently with the Guthrie case, and how that case has been resourced and the amount of attention that's been paid to it, I feel like every missing person and every missing person's family deserves the same. So I think everybody should, keep talking about it and see if we can figure out a way to make that happen.
Yeah. That'd be amazing. That'd be incredible. If, like you said, if every missing person had this amount of resources, media coverage, every time, I think a lot more of these missing people would be found.
Yeah. And if a case remains open, like Amy's case, 27, 28 years later, then there should remain a sense of urgency with it. And the investigation should be proactive and not just reactive, responding to leads and following things down. There should be, as much attention paid to anybody that is being paid to Miss Guthrie. And I hope that for the future, the reward money and how reward determinations are made in any case. A reward isn't just symbolic. I mean, it's a behavioral tool. Even though Amy's case is old, the people and we've always said this from the beginning, that somebody knows something. And in fact, I think more than one person knows something. So over time, I think what happens is loyalties change, fear regarding what may happen to you if you come forward with information may fade a bit. Um, People face different financial pressures, and a meaningful reward is maybe at this point what would potentially incentivize that person that has stayed silent for so long to come forward. With the Guthrie case, I've seen it go from 2,500 to 50,000 to 100,000. I understand it looks like 200,000 now, but I think the additional 100 or the doubling came from an anonymous donor.
Right.
That's not necessarily from the FBI. But Amy's reward has, been stagnant and stayed at 25,000 for decades. And why is that? I think if the point is to incentivize someone to come forward and provide new information, the reward should be a meaningful reward that would maybe influence somebody to do something like that. But you offer someone 25,000 versus 250,000, I think they seriously consider, maybe it's time to say what they know. So, again, I think it's unfortunate, and I hesitate to, compare cases or talk about fairness, at a time when the Guthries are going through what they're going through. And this isn't just about Amy either. I mean, this is like we've been talking about for the last half hour. It's about every missing person and how important every missing person is, to their families and everybody who knows them. So I think there should be some sort of transparency that is provided. Now, obviously, we know the FBI is not going to share case information or any details, and they never have with us, but at least to communicate how these rewards are determined, who makes the decisions, when and if they are, if there's any, if they're ever reevaluated, and how often, and is it done annually or is it done every 10 years? But I think that when families, I mean, I don't know how many families out there have no reward, and what they must feel like. So, I think that, we've put in, different requests to the FBI. We met with them in DC a few weeks back, and me and my dad sat in there and personally asked them if they'd be willing to raise the reward. And they said, well, we'll check with whoever they check with. And meanwhile, we've seen, with the Guthrie case, how seemingly easy it is to just change it. If you want to. So we'll see what happens. And, I'm hopeful that, someone will come up with, an amount of money that would not only help Miss Guthrie and her family, but Amy and every other missing person out there.
And my thanks to Brad for chatting with me. You can follow along Brad on X. He's very active and posts updates and things like that. And appreciate his insight on this. And we hope that there's answers on Amy's case soon. Okay, from Brad, let's jump over and talk with Gilbert King. Gilbert King is a Pulitzer Prize winning author who was really an author, not a podcaster or a documentarian or anything like that. He was an author and spent years working on these books until he came out with Bone Valley. Gilbert King tells the story of a man named Leo Schofield fighting to prove his innocence in the case of his wife Michelle's murder. There are now season 4 is about to come out. There's a brand new season. I found Gilbert King in Bone Valley with season 1 a few years ago. I actually ran into him, met him at CrimeCon. I listened to the podcast before and became just riveted with it. Then season 2 came out and talked about the actual killer, Jeremy Scott, fighting to prove his guilt. The state of Florida doesn't believe either man. Gilbert tells the story of Jeremy and the story of Leo. Leo didn't do it, Gilbert did, but no one will believe them. They're fighting for each other and for their own cases. I don't want to give too much away if you haven't heard the podcast. If you have, I think that you'll enjoy it. For now, here is Gilbert King. Gilbert, it's so great to talk with you. I became obsessed with this podcast. I think I was kind of late to the game, but it was several months ago when I just binged listened to all of season 1. For the few people that aren't familiar with it, can you kind of set it up, like what the story is, how you were involved?
Yeah, sure. Basically, Bone Valley season 1 is the story of a wrongful conviction of Leo Schofield, who was convicted in 1989 of killing his wife, Michelle. And he's always maintained his innocence. And, as you listen to the podcast, you start to see that it's a pretty extraordinary case, because it's one of those cases that, this man had no legal options. All his appeals were exhausted. He settled into prison. And then about 17 years into his sentence, this evidence emerged that pointed to a man who was extraordinarily violent, who lived in the same neighborhood as Leo, who had been in prison for another murder that he committed. And his fingerprints were matched to the car that Leo's wife was driving at the time. And so these fingerprints sort of set up a new legal, battle to free Leo Schofield, because they pointed to a man who, lived about a mile away. And ultimately this man confessed to killing Leo's wife, and it still wasn't enough to get Leo out of prison. And so that's basically the story of this journey that we focused on reinvestigating this wrongful conviction over, many years.
Yeah, so many twists and turns in the story. How did you personally become involved? Do you remember when you first heard about the story and what made you decide to chase it?
Yeah, absolutely. I was speaking down in Florida. I do a lot of speaking because I'm an author and I write about criminal justice and civil rights in Florida. And I was speaking at a judges convention down in Naples, and there were about 200 circuit court judges. And after I gave my speech about one of my books, a judge came up to me afterwards, handed me a business card. And on the back of the business card, it had the name Leo Schofield, his prison number, and it said, not just wrongfully convicted, he's an innocent man. And I remember thinking, oh, this is a judge that's basically telling me that there's an innocent man in prison.
That doesn't happen a lot.
It doesn't happen. I mean, I've never had it happen to me. And there's like ethical, problems with that. He's not supposed to speak out critically about the justice system. And here he was saying, no, there was an innocent man that was convicted. And I finally called him back when I got back to my office, and he said, this man was framed. I can tell you exactly how they did it to him. And he started to walk me through the story and the case. And I frankly couldn't believe what I was hearing. And I started looking into it. And then at one point I just said, I got to write about this. This is something I want to write about. And then, Nate, I'll just tell you, I'm not a podcaster. I had no experience in that before. Ultimately, after I did some research, I went in and met Leo Schofield in prison and listened to him. And I just came away thinking, this is a story that you really need to hear his voice. I don't think I could do it justice by just writing about this. He was so passionate and so committed to being, wrongfully convicted and framed for his wife's murder, that I just felt you needed to hear that desperation in his voice. And I said, you know what? Maybe we can do a podcast about this and just do it that way instead of telling it with a book or an article.
Well, and when you listen to him and you present the timeline of events to the point that it's very clear he did not do these crimes, yet it seemed like there was roadblock after roadblock after roadblock to the point of frustration of what more can this guy do? I mean, as you're covering this and reporting this, did you kind of get that sense too? Like, this is so obvious that he shouldn't be in prison, that this shouldn't be on his record, yet it still is.
Yeah, and then that was ultimately it. And I think, adding to the urgency of it is he had no more appeals left. He was he had to accept the fact that there was nothing more that he could do legally in order to get out of prison. He'd exhausted all his appeals. So the only thing that really he had going for him was somebody maybe telling a story, and the story maybe making it a big enough impact to affect his legal situation. And that's part of the, the conflict of it, because, I told him, I'd met with him a dozen times and talked to him on the phone, a lot. And, I said, Leo, I I don't want to get your hopes up because I don't know that this is going to make a difference. I mean, I can't do anything legally. It's just putting a story out there. At one point, I told him, I think I've gotten to the point now I can change the narrative of your case. I'd done enough investigation into this where I was absolutely convinced that we had things now that didn't come out in court that proved his innocence. But I said, I don't know that this is going to make any difference. And I don't want to give you any false hope about this. And I remember he said, Gilbert, hope is all I have right now. I don't mind false hope. And that kind of put things in perspective to me. And, but like, it's one of those things where like you go in and see somebody and, my stories take a long time. The books I write take about 5 years to do. It's awkward saying, hey, sit back for a couple of years here in prison and I'm going to do what I can out there.
Yeah.
But that's all he had. And so, I think a lot was riding on it. I tried not to put a lot of pressure on myself, thinking that this would be the answer. But I did believe that I could change the narrative of the case because of what I was able to find.
So I want to ask you personally, having been an author writing these in-depth stories, how was the transition for you going from, 300 to 400 page books to 60-minute podcasts?
Yeah, I mean, it was something to learn. I mean, I felt like I was kind of an idiot when I first started it. I didn't know how to interview people for tape. I know how to interview people for my books, and I speak over them. I go, yeah, right. And I realized I was ruining a lot of tape by just my style of it. So, but recognizing that and learning it, I think it taught me to be a better interviewer and taught me how to listen better and just be quiet and let people talk and let them fill that space. And so that was really a learning process. There was also the idea of just, when you're investigating these kind of cases, you realize how important the sound is. Like I know it sounds kind of corny, but people who do podcasts know this. You're kind of writing your scripts around the sounds and the tape that you get. And I was never used to that before. I'm always just a content. You write about what you discovered. But here it was about the most important tape. And so I had to learn to sort of put it together differently than I would a book. Obviously this case took place in the 80s. The trial takes place in the 1980s. There's no audio, there's no video. It's just transcripts. I didn't want to be in a situation where I'm just reading transcripts to people, and I didn't want to do that. And so we had to shorten the trial a little bit because it's just not something we had sound for. But we had other people describing the trial and Leo describing it, and so you learn to work a little bit differently. But I gotta say, I love the format. I love the platform of this. I'm really I can't wait to do more of this. I'm really just enjoying it so much. It seems like a real natural fit once I learn to be a little bit better and a little bit more effective about telling stories that way.
Well, you've got a great, unique voice. Not everybody can podcast. Not everybody can come across as, really invested in the story as you are, and also have that unique voice to it. What was what did you think when you released it and it had such a reaction, such a positive reaction?
Again, I think it came back to something I told Leo. Like I said, I'd written books before that led to exonerations, but it took time. It took time after the book was published, and it wasn't just putting the story out. It took somebody coming along and saying, I want to pass a bill to exonerate these, people in my other books. And so like, it's not just me doing the story. I didn't know what was going to come of it. I thought we told a really strong story over 9 episodes, and I was really, really proud of it. But I was always downplaying the effect that this was going to have. It's just a story. This shouldn't be responsible for somebody's freedom. I mean, the judiciary is what's responsible for that. The courts, not a story. It shouldn't be a story can have an impact like that. But fortunately for us, it got a lot of attention. I think people really were drawn to Leo. They were also drawn to the fact that I had finally reached the actual murder of Leo's wife, and he decided to talk to me. And I think he'd always been used to being grilled by prosecutors and attorneys and law enforcement. He wasn't used to somebody sitting down who said, I want to listen. Please tell me your story. And to not judge him, to just sort of let him be free to tell that story. And I think the way he spoke to me and the person I was working with, Kelsey Decker, the producer, I think he spoke to us differently. And you could feel his emotions and even his discomfort about admitting to something, murders that he committed that he'd never been caught for before. And I think that was probably the most powerful part of this entire story was people believed that the man who confessed to killing Leo's wife was being truthful, and that Leo were being truthful. And you have these two guys who are telling the truth, and the state of Florida won't believe either one of them. And it just sort of ends right there. And so I was really just thrilled to see like all the attention, and we started to get some legal momentum. And ultimately, through parole, Leo was able to get out of prison. And Leo will tell you that it was the podcast Bone Valley that was the only reason he got out of prison, because they were never going to let him out.
It's incredible what a series like this can do and how it can really change things, as this is evident in this case. How's he doing today?
Well, he's doing really well. I have to say, like, he had a really bad time of it. Once he was released to a halfway house, and there he'd gotten a job. He was riding around on his motorcycle, something he was doing back in his days of freedom. And he got in a really serious motorcycle crash. Somebody cut right in front of him, and he got basically broke almost every bone in his body, and he was laid up in a hospital bed for months. He's finally coming around and walking again, and sort of establishing his life. But you couldn't picture a man who's been through everything, 36 years of wrongful imprisonment, and then in 6 months out in a halfway house, he gets in a completely debilitating motorcycle crash. So that has been a challenge for him. I think there's probably nobody on earth who can get through these challenges like Leo. I mean, he just has the right attitude, and he's getting around. And I would say he's doing pretty well overall. It's an adjustment for anybody who's been in prison for that long, but I think there's some people out there who really came to really believe him, some powerful people in Florida, including State Senator Jonathan Martin, who's become an advocate for his freedom and for his exoneration. And so I think the day will come when he'll be fully exonerated. It's not going to be enough to make up for those lost decades in prison.
Yeah.
But it is something that I don't think he ever would have experienced if it wasn't for his story getting out there.
So that was season 1 of Bone Valley, which, again, if you haven't listened, you should go listen to it. Now you're back with a new season. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, and this is something that, I think a lot of people found it hard to believe, but after Jeremy Scott, the real murderer of Leo's wife, began talking to me, I continued that correspondence with him. And, over the next 4 years, I would send him books. We would just talk. Sometimes we didn't talk about anything, crimes. But after a while, he began to trust me, and he started, confessing to other murders that he committed that he gotten away with. And he started drawing me maps and giving me details. And I am 110% convinced that he's been telling me the truth about these. And so I've gathered all this information and brought this out to, the officials. And so it sounds kind of strange, but Jeremy became like my greatest advocate. He was helping me to solve the murders that he committed. And, we'd have these conversations like, I just remembered something about this. I remembered a detail, and he would give me more and more details. And there's absolutely no doubt that he did this. And by becoming honest with me, his family, who had listened to season 1 and who had abandoned him decades ago, began to come back into his life, including the son that he really never met. He had a son from a relationship that happened right before he went to prison and was convicted of another murder, that wanted nothing to do with him, didn't want to know who his father was, but who listened to the podcast and said, he doesn't sound like a monster. He sounds like a broken person who's trying to take accountability. And he began writing to his father. And so he sort of facilitated that relationship with this son who, he really never knew. And I have to say, it was probably Jeremy Scott's happiest moment in prison, knowing that his son actually reached out to him and wanted to, pick up this relationship with him. I mean, he just, where the way he communicated that. And so it became sort of this investigation where, I'm helping Jeremy and he's helping me solve the murders of the past. And, he knows he's never going to get out of prison. That was something he was aware of. He was never going to get out. He had life without parole. But he did realize that he could help the families of his victims and even Leo himself. And ultimately, this is very strange, but I was visiting Leo, who was laid up in a hospital bed, when Jeremy called me. And I was able to get them on the phone. And then the two of them spoke for the first time. And Jeremy basically apologized to Leo, not just for taking his wife, but for being the cause of him spending 36 years in prison. And Leo, being true to the Leo I knew, basically forgave Jeremy. And this is an extraordinary moment of this, like, these two people coming together in this kind of grassroots restorative justice moment where the state of Florida wasn't going to acknowledge the truth of what really happened, but these two men between them did acknowledge the truth. And I think that became so painfully obvious to anyone who listened that these men were telling the truth. There was no incentive for them to lie about this stuff. And then you just see the limits of what the courts can really do and what truth really can look like.
Yeah. It's a powerful part in the podcast. I remember listening to it and Leo very casually, it seemed to me, was like, it's all right. It's okay. I mean, like, wait, what? You've just spent 3.5 decades for something you didn't commit. You'd think there'd be a little bit of anger there, but in a way, it was like a brotherly type love. Why do you think these guys, particularly the real killer, opened up to you and decided to divulge all?
Well, it took a long time. It took me well over a year of writing to him. I just never stopped writing to him. And, I knew he was holding on to something. I knew he had these facts but they never really came out before because he was always cross-examined. A lot of times he was taken to court where he was off his medications. He was extremely agitated. He definitely has some psychological problems. He's got some brain damage from when he was a child. He was run over by a relative. And, so he had some serious challenges about this, but I think it was just being patient and just telling that I wanted to hear his story. I wasn't going to grill him. I didn't want to talk about things that he wasn't comfortable talking with. And I think once we got in the prison and in person, I think he saw that and he recognized that and he began talking. The other side of it was just, a lot of people say, well, how could Leo possibly forgive the guy who murders his wife and, is the cause of him spending, nearly 4 decades in prison? And that was something that Leo really had to explain to us as well. And I think the key to that was he was angry. He was bitter for many years. And he recognized that holding on to this knowledge and this frustration that another man killed my wife and the state will not believe any of this, it was going to destroy him. And the only way for him to find some kind of relief for himself was, he's a very spiritual person. He's a pastor in the prison in God Behind Bars. And he had these responsibility to the men that he was overseeing in that prison. And he was sort of helping them through these kind of things, but he wasn't helping himself. And he finally learned that the only path toward that was he had to learn to forgive Jeremy. That's the only thing that was going to get him to get through this bitterness and anger. And, it wasn't easy for him. And he's very clear about it. He says, I cannot forgive Jeremy for what he's done to my wife. That's, the wife's family. I was doing it for myself. I was doing it because I don't think I could survive unless I got spiritually to another place. And so once he explained that, it made sense. He didn't want to carry this anger, this bitterness, because it wasn't helping anybody and it was destroying him. And so for him, it was something that was a personal journey. And I think knowing who Leo is and his spirituality and his commitment to this, he had to do this for his own self.
Mm. What a story. What a story. So season 4 is out now, right?
Yeah, well, we're starting to go because now the Bone Valley feed is taking in some other Bone Valley stories that take place that are wrongful convictions, but they're not the Leo and Jeremy stories. So season 4 is out now, but it's a different case. We're just bringing it into this Bone Valley feed.
I see.
But season 2 was the one that was between Jeremy and Leo and their relationship. So
right. It's a great podcast. Anything else you're working on that you want to announce or can you talk about?
Well, yeah, there's been, some more developments along the Bone Valley saga, which I'm calling it the Bone Valley universe. And it's something like I was ready to move on, but then something else happened. Right. And so now we're investigating that. And, I feel like, well, it's a story that just doesn't end. And, I didn't want to dive back into it, really. I was ready to move on. Leo was ready to move on. And then something happened and we're like, okay, we're back in this now. So I can't really talk about it yet, but we're developing it, but it'll be out at some point. So there'll be more to it, but yeah.
Love to hear. Great work. I really appreciate you talking with me, Gilbert. Are you going to be at CrimeCon again, do you think?
Yes, in fact, I'll be there with Leo too. So Leo was going to be there last time, but he had to have some emergency surgery as sort of a run over from his motorcycle accident, so he couldn't make it last time. But I promised everybody we'd be there next time, so we are going to be there in Las Vegas. So
Awesome. It will be great to see you again, and I hope to meet Leo. And I know that the event will be packed because it's an amazing story. And kudos to you for pursuing it, spending so much of your life pursuing it. And thank you for sharing it with the rest of us.
well, thanks, Nate. I really appreciate the support, and thanks for having me on. It was a pleasure talking to you about it. So looking forward to see you at CrimeCon.
All right. Thank you again to Gilbert King. If you haven't listened to Bone Valley, do it. It's one of those that you can binge from season 1 to season 2, 3, 4. They're all out now, except season 4. I'm one of those guys that I love to listen to a brand new podcast when it comes out. But then again, I also don't like it if they only release one at a time because I want to binge through the whole thing. So right now I'm binging Shadow Girls. I'm almost done with it. We talked about that the other night. And then the other one, Gardens of Evil with Mike King and Aaron Mason. You've got to listen to that one. Those are my recommendations, which is about the Zion Society cult in northern Utah. Crazy from the 90s. So those are my recommendations. Thanks to Gilbert. Thanks to Brad Bradley. The information that he was sharing, the numbers he was sharing about the numbers of missing people are from NamUs and from the DOJ. And I mentioned earlier about a missing kid that I just heard about named Sebastian. And I figured I need to tell you about Sebastian because it's 2 years ago Monday that he vanished. Sebastian, February 26th, Katie Proudfoot went to wake up her 14-year-old son, Sebastian Rogers, for school. To her surprise, he was nowhere to be found. Sebastian Rogers had spent the previous day with his mom. The pair shopped at a department store, played video games at a bowling alley, and then had dinner at Texas Roadhouse before heading home for the evening. After returning to their house in Hendersonville, Tennessee, Katie and Sebastian prepared for bed, said goodnight sometimes between 9 and 10. Katie told the detectives that a little bit before 10, she heard a loud bang coming from Sebastian's room. She yelled out if he was okay. He said he was. She told him to go to bed because they had to get up early for school. Katie called her husband, who was out of town, and the two of them spoke, she says, for nearly 2 hours before she went to sleep around midnight. The next morning was the beginning of what would become a massive search effort. She called her husband and said, Sebastian's not in his room. She got in her car, drove around the neighborhood to the school, which was less than a mile away. Before returning home, husband called 911 to report Sebastian missing. In the early days, it seemed he had vanished without a trace. And then there's all sorts of question marks, and it only grew as the search went on. He didn't take any clothes, no shoes, no money, no food, no cell phone. His phone and cash were lying on the dining room table where they'd been the day before when he went to bed. There was a small yellow flashlight she thinks was missing, but that was the only thing that appeared to be gone from the house. First week, massive search efforts, 4.5-mile radius around his home, 2,000 searchers equipped with app tracking movements. They covered a 4.5-mile radius that equals 44,000 acres. Law enforcement sent firefighters, mounted patrols, ATVs, search and rescue canines, helicopters, even an airplane. FBI came in, and Sebastian, I should have led with this. Or put it up toward the top. He is on the autism spectrum, and nearly 50% of autism children are prone to wander and they're drawn to bodies of water. 71% of fatal drownings involve missing autistic children. 71% of fatal outcomes involving missing autistic children are the result of drowning. Let me clarify that. 71% of autistic kids who go missing are, if they're fatalities, it's because they drowned. Law enforcement went through video recordings of neighbors, dash cams. They didn't find anything on that. They followed through on every tips. Right now, the FBI is offering a $50,000 reward for information leading to his whereabouts. He's 5'5", 110 to 115 pounds, brown hair, eyes that look hazel or brown. He would be 16 now. He has autism, and that might impair him. He wears eyeglasses as well. That is Sebastian Rogers. I don't know much more about the case. I know many of you have sent me theories and different things. I have not had much time to research any of it. So we might do a deep dive on this a little bit later in the month, but that is Sebastian Rogers. Now, Monday, Kouri Richins, not Lisa. I just got a message from a lady named Lisa. The trial for Kouri Richins starts Monday. And we'd love for you to join us as we watch it and as we recap it. Here's the schedule, the rundown, 8:15 every morning. I'm going to go live and give you a recap of what we can expect for the day and what happened the day before. So if you missed it, if you're not caught up, whatever, tune in at 8:15. It'll be a 15-minute recap, much like we're doing now. And then at 8:30, the live stream starts. We'll be live on the East Idaho News YouTube channel. Be sure to hit subscribe and hit the bell. And if you like the video too, that way you'll get alerted when the trial starts. I'll be posting live written updates on eastidahonews.com and also on my X feed, which is Nate News Now, throughout the trial every day. And so if you can't watch or you're at work or school, whatever, you can just read a recap quickly at lunch. If you need to, or at the end of the day. And then every night, 7 o'clock, we'll be live with Courtroom Insider. I'll recap the events of the day. Peggy will join us, our comment moderator, to take your questions. I'll answer your questions if I can, and then do some shout outs and things like that. And that's how it will be starting Monday. I will not be in court every day, but I will be watching court every day, and I will be in the courtroom some days. There's only a limited number of media seats, and the way that they're handling that is a little bit different. And there's only 24 public seats. If you want all the information about it, watch last night's Courtroom Insider. I went through all the details, and I have that going on there. Big thanks, newspapers.com. They're our sponsor. They're our supporter. We appreciate all they do for us. You want to look up anything about Amy Bradley? You want to look up anything about Leo Schofield, the cases we talked about tonight? Newspapers.com. You can find all the newspaper stories from the archive from decades ago, and they are such a great resource, and you can try it free for 7 days. So if you want to go check it out, I know a lot of people who do it far longer than 7 days. They get into it. They love it. They stay logged on. My dad is a big fan. I think he's on there every single day. So big thanks to newspapers.com. Big thanks to you for watching. Follow me throughout the day if you can. I'm on Facebook, Nate Eaton Reporter. I probably post 5 to 10 news stories on there every day, along with some personal photos and whatnot. Facebook, for me, is my #1 social media of choice. I know a lot of you youngsters are like, what? Sorry, I'm not on Snapchat. I'm not on TikTok. I'm not on Be Real. What are the other ones? Not on any of those. Maybe I should be. But I am on Instagram, and I am on Twitter, and I am on YouTube. And again, hit subscribe if you haven't. Would love to have you here. And we'll be back Monday. Kouri Richins, 8:15 Mountain Time. All of those times were Mountain Standard Time. Tune in if you can. And then if not, we'll see you Monday night back here for Courtroom Insider. I hope you have a great weekend. Enjoy the rest of your time, and we'll see you on Monday.